Hi, this is Tim Cant for Native Instruments, and I'm going to show you how to make a hip-hop track with NI's Beat Safari bundle that's on offer right now. A lot of the content in this bundle is Maschine based, but there's a whole load that isn't, so in this tutorial I'm just going to use Ableton Live for my sequencer, Kontakt for my sampler, and a few other NI instruments and effects. The techniques we're going to look at here are transferable to whatever DAW or sampler you use, so let's get cracking. For this track I wanted to explore some of the exotic content available in the Beat Safari collection and felt that a lower tempo that let the sounds breathe would be a good idea. So I began by setting the project tempo to 95 BPM and looked for some suitable sounds to start with. I'm a big proponent of working with drums first, specifically kicks, but in this case I really wanted the beats to service the music. Contemporary hip-hop drum sounds such as minimal 808 style kicks, snares and hats are relatively easy to fit into a mix as long as the musical elements aren't too convoluted. So I set out to find some material that would set the vibe and give me some rhythmic cues while leaving me enough room to manoeuvre in terms of creating a contemporary beat. I auditioned a bunch of sounds and settled on Metal Bowls 1 from the Global Shake library, which had a vaguely exotic vibe and was close to the tempo I'd already decided upon. I warped this up using Live's complex pro mode because I was more concerned about preserving the feel of the loop than affecting its transients, and I looped up the first couple of beats to give me a simple melodic groove to work from. I wanted to make the most of this sound, so I duplicated the track and pitched the new version down an octave with a formant level of 0 so that Live wouldn't do any formant processing on it. This gave me a more full range sound that, while simple, certainly had enough rhythmic and melodic cues to base the rest of the track around. The next sound I found that I felt really fit with the direction I wanted to go in was Vocal Black Sky from the Golden Kingdom pack. At 99 BPM, this was again close to my target tempo, so I knew I wouldn't have to warp it in an extreme fashion, and aside from warping it to the project tempo, all I did was change the start point of the sample to the second eighth note, which I felt helped it sit more neatly with the metal bowl loop. So earlier I was feeling pretty gung-ho about the beat situation, but I'm not that brave, so at this point I wanted to get some drums in there to make sure I could get a groove going. I wanted to find a big, fat 808 kick drum sound, and I found it in the form of Kick Nixon DS from the Elastic Thump expansion. I began by setting Kontakt's maximum number of voices to 1 so that I wouldn't get any unwanted overlapping notes, and applied a saturator insert effect to warm it up a bit. I also fancied having a bit more pitch movement in there than you'd get from a standard 808 kick, so I added glide as a modulation source for the pitch. It was also important to me that this sound really filled up the low end with a consistent subtone, so I used Transient Master with a maximum sustain so that the sound would be long and loud. The part I programmed was simple, so as not to make things too messy. Before adding any more drum sounds, I wanted to ensure that I had room for some pitched percussion. I grabbed the Young Kalimba C2 sample from the Global Shake pack and dropped this into Kontakt and played a simple 2-note vamp that would be something I could base the rest of the beats and music around. I still wasn't ready to commit to a hat and snare yet because I wanted to develop the rhythm a bit more, so I found a shaker sample, a shaker absolutely from the Elastic Thump library, and chopped it up in Kontakt so I could sequence it how I wanted. I turned the grid snap off in Live so I could really fine-tune the timing of this part. With the track swing now defined, I was finally ready to put the rest of the beats in, so I selected a crusty sounding hat, closed HH, crawfish and 808s 1 from the Headland Flow library, and sequenced a syncopated pattern that played off the existing percussion sounds. To tame the crustiness a bit, I added enhanced EQ to cut the highs a little. At this point I was finally ready to add a snare. I wanted a crisp, clean 808 style snare that would counterpoint the crusty feel of the other sounds, so I selected Snare A-Wave from Global Shake and loaded this into Contact, turning down the amplitude envelope, sustain and decay to give me a punchy little sound. It was a bit too toppy for the rest of the mix, so I brought in solid EQ to cut the high mids and boost the low mids. I was pretty happy with the beat I'd made up to this stage, but I didn't want it to be too clean, and I had plenty of loops in the Beat Safari pack to work with, so I layered what I'd got with some of the loops from the Golden Kingdom expansion, specifically 2 variations of the Georgia Snapper loop. I used Georgia Snapper 1, which is the full version of the loop during the full-on parts of the track, and Georgia Snapper 4, which is a much more minimal version during the intro and breakdown. As you can hear, Georgia Snapper 1 has a big heavy sub and prominent hats, so I used solid EQ to cut the lows and highs enough for it to fit into the mix without cluttering it, and then I processed the signal with solid bus comp so that its percussive elements would be a little louder and be audible with the rest of the beat. So the beat is now fully fleshed out and I'm ready to add some more musical elements. I was going for an organic vibe here, so I wasn't sure that I'd find any massive patches that would fit, but I thought I'd better check them out just in case, and I came across Friends 2 in the Meteoric Rise library which, while still clearly synthesized, still fitted the style I was going for. It reminded me of Busta Rhymes' Do the Bussa Bus, so I turned down the reverb and sequenced it into a tight little 2-note percussive groove, which I felt fitting with the rest of the sounds without being too nostalgic or synthetic sounding. I really wanted some more organic sounding parts, so I decided to check out what Beat Safari had to offer in terms of Prism patches. Prism is a physical modelling synth, and as such it can make noises that aren't immediately identifiable as coming from a synth. I was delighted to discover that there were plenty of patches that fit in with what I'd already created. The first Prism patch I used was Acoustics from Global Shake, which is a really 3-dimensional sounding tuned percussion patch. I used this to add a little syncopated rhythmic hook that switched between playing in triplets and playing straight 8th notes. The next patch that caught my attention was Instabilities, again from the Global Shake library, which I felt was a strong sound, but to my ear it had something of an East Asian vibe, and I wasn't sure it was going to work in context. So I had a bit of a play, and I came up with an extremely simple 2-note hook that plays at the end of each 4-bar section that I felt added a little bit of a different vibe without sounding too incongruous. I was pleased with how things were progressing, but it felt like while there are a few cute little hooks in the track already, it was lacking a main theme. Thankfully, Global Shake came up trumps again with the popper patch, which sounds like a steel drum and reminded me a little bit of Kodak Black's ZZ. So I jammed around with it and came up with a super simple riff which worked with the bass line in a call and response fashion. This really drove the track despite being pretty minimal, so I was really satisfied with it. But I didn't want it to get too repetitive, so I programmed a variation with some lower velocity ghost notes. I also used Native Instruments' Chorus Effect Choral to move it around the stereo panorama so that it felt more in its own space. By this point, I was totally addicted to tuned percussion sounds, and I wanted to cram one more in there, specifically Kalim Rhodes from the Headland Flow Pack, which plays a fifth occasionally to provide a bit of musical variation. Now there's plenty of music going on, it's time for some effects to keep the track moving and give us a little ear candy. These are all super simple. In fact, the most involved effect is SFX The Crown from the infamous Flow expansion, which is a white noise sweep that I use to accent the drop. I put a reversed and truncated version before the drop to build up to it, and I also applied Replica XT to give it a little 8th note dotted delay. The same delay settings are used on SFX Appio from the Global Shake pack, and this is just a great sample with a cool character that I used to fill up the mix when taking elements out. A little bit of musical sleight of hand, if you will. Whistle damage from the Global Shake pack didn't require any processing at all, and this plays on the last beat of an 8-bar section, creating a little bit of a counterpoint to the Instabilities lick. To give a little more character to the white noise rise before the drop, I added SFX Crusoes from the Lilac Glare expansion, reversing it and cropping it so it swells up before the bass drops. The last element to be added is SFX Venti 1 from Lilac Glare, which is a synthetic sounding but subtle hip hop riser. Again, this has some Replica XT delay on it to help transition from one section to the next. Now we've seen all the elements, let's take a look at the arrangement. If you struggle to break out from an 8 or 16 bar loop to full arrangements, you might find this helpful because, as you can see, there's nothing too complex going on. We're just adding elements and taking them away, using hooks and transition effects to stop things from sounding too jarring or repetitive, and always giving the listener just enough to hopefully keep them interested.